Hey everybody, BlendMaster here with another tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to create this cool procedural marble texture inside of Blender. So we're going to go over creating this cube marble material here first, and then I'm going to show you how to edit this material and customize it so that you can get different effects like this second marble plane here. So let's jump into Blender and get started. So the first thing we want to do is delete this lamp here by pressing X. And with the cube selected, I'm going to press G and Z to move it on the Z-axis, and I'll type in 1 and press enter. Now I'll press Shift A to add in a plane, and I'm going to scale that up by 100 units, and I'll press enter. And so this plane here is going to be one marble material that I'll show you, and this cube here will be another one. So to create these materials, we want to first jump into the Cycles engine, and I'm going to open up a new window here, and let's switch it to the node editor, and I'm going to press N to get rid of that tab. We're going to make sure Use Nodes is selected. So first thing for this material, we're going to create the actual texture. So let's add in a noise texture here, and I'll press Ctrl T to bring up this mapping node as well as this texture coordinate node, and we're going to take the object output and plug it into the vector here. And I'm also going to add in a color ramp node. Let's just plug this noise texture into that. If we press Ctrl Shift and left click and then go to rendered view here, you can see this noise texture's preview. So that's looking pretty good. Now what we want to do is distort this noise texture by adding in a Voronoi texture. So let's just add that in. We want to take this color output from the color ramp and plug it into the vector input for this Voronoi texture. And let's duplicate this color ramp and plug it in like that. And if we take a look at this, you can start to see that it's looking really distorted. So what I'm going to do to decrease that distortion is with this Voronoi texture selected, I'll press Ctrl T to bring up this texture coordinate and mapping node as well. And let's just make some space here. And in between this texture coordinate node and this mapping node, I want to add in a mix RGB node, like that. And we want to take this object output and plug it into the first socket. We'll take this noise texture output and plug it into the second socket. And I'm going to decrease this factor to something like 0.25 maybe. And after plugging that into the mapping node, we'll plug this into the vector now. And you can see that's looking a lot less distorted now. Actually, what I want to do is take the color ramp and plug it into this mix RGB node, and that should be better. So now if we adjust this factor, you can sort of see how it's affecting our cube, and I think 0.25 or 0.2 would work best. So now I'm going to adjust the scaling of these noise textures and Voronoi texture to about 20, like that. And let's increase that to 20. You can start to see the effect that it's having. It's really small right now. And let's increase this detail to maybe 10. I think that's good. And I think this actually might be a little too much. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'll decrease the scale to maybe 10. And this really depends on the size of your object for these scale values. The bigger it is, the bigger the value you're going to need to get the same effect. Might increase this factor to about 0.5. Yeah, that's looking a lot better now. So now what we need to do is duplicate this color ramp node and create our actual colors. So for this first one, I want to give it a dark brownish color, something like that. The second color, we'll make it a light tan color, something like that. I think that's looking good. Let's maybe desaturate this a little bit, like that. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe a little darker. No. Something that like that looks pretty good. So now that we have the basic marble texture created, what we want to do is create a little specks. So to do that, I'm just going to select this noise texture here and duplicate it by pressing Shift D. And we'll press Ctrl T to bring up these two nodes again and make sure object is selected. And let's duplicate this color ramp node here, plug that in, and if we take a look at this, I'm just going to increase this black value here, slider, to about there, and just pull in this white slider as well, so that we can get some nice specks, sort of like that. And that's looking pretty good. So now to create the actual material, what we're going to do is just move these back here, and let's plug in our color into our diffuse shader like that, and we'll press Shift A to add in a mix shader. Whoops, mix shader, and let's add in a glossy shader, plug this in, and I'm going to decrease this roughness to 0. We're going to use this black and white speckle texture as our factor for this, and as you can see, once we've done that, we have our diffuse shader, and wherever it's white is going to be our 100% glossy texture. And so let's just give that a nice light yellowish color to reflect, like that. And I'm also going to add in an environment texture after I make this background transparent. Let's see, environment texture. Let's open up the HDR. Maybe that one will be good. So now we're getting some nice lighting in our scene. And I think I want to adjust these colors a little bit more to maybe something more orangish like that. Maybe this could be a little bit darker like that. Maybe make the overall colors a little bit brighter. I think that looks pretty good. So now you can see that we're getting these specks there. You might want to increase this size to about 20 so that we're getting a lot more specks like that. And let's desaturate this as well. So that's looking pretty good. Now we want to create the overall glossiness for this. So let's press Shift D to duplicate that. And actually for this roughness I want to increase it to maybe 0.2. so that it's not as sharp of a reflection on the thing right there. And now we can duplicate this glossy shader, and this one we want to set the roughness to 0, and we also want to make the color a pure white, and we're also going to add in a Fresnel node for this factor. So just plug those in like that, and there we go, basic procedural marble texture done completely inside of Blender. So what we can do, I'm going to rename this marble, and I'll select our plane here, and I'm going to assign it that same marble texture, but I'm going to press this 2 button here to make it a separate material so that we can actually edit it, because right now, since we're using the object vector, since the values are set to 20, it's really scaled up in perspective compared to this cube here. So I'm just going to go over here, and I'm going to change the scale to about 100. And same thing with this Voronoi texture here. Scale that up to 100. And I'm going to decrease this factor to about 0.2 so it's not as strong. And now that we have this color ramp here looking like that, let's take this color ramp, and I'm going to change this to just a black color like that. And now we can drag this up here. You can sort of see the effect that we're getting. We're getting just these lines for our marble texture, which is kind of what I want. So I'm going to drag it up to right about there. And let's change this color to something like that. I think that looks pretty good. And we're also going to have to increase the size of this noise texture here to something crazy, maybe 2000. You can start to see we're getting a lot more of those little specks there. That's looking pretty good. So now if we take a look at this, you'll start to see that we have a completely different marble texture. So with this entire texture group here, you can adjust all of these values to fit your scene with anything. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this marble texture. Now I'm just going to close this node editor here, and I'm going to find a view that I like, sort of like this. If we press Ctrl Alt 0, it'll snap our camera to view. I'm going to select our camera and just position it right where I want, something like this. Maybe press R and then double click X to rotate it on the local X-axis. And I can press G and Z to move it up and position our camera right where we want. So I'm going to position it right about there. And what I'm actually going to do is tab into edit mode and select this vertex here, and if I press Shift S, it'll snap, bring up this menu here. I'm going to say snap the cursor to selected, then tab out of edit mode and add in a empty, like that, plain axis. And if we select our camera here and go to the camera settings, we can scroll down to focus and put in that empty there. And if we go to rendered view, I'm just going to select border so it's not rendering anything outside. We can adjust this radius value so that we can get some nice depth of field. So let's try something like 0.1 maybe, 0.2, and you can see that it's a little bit extreme. If you want, you can just reposition this empty wherever you want. Let's position it in the center of our cube like that. And if we do that, the front of this cube's a little bit out of focus, so let's move it right about there. I think that's good. And let's adjust this factor to maybe 0.1 so it's not as strong. I think that looks pretty good. So now I'll go to the render settings here. I'm going to change this samples to about 200. I'm also going to make sure that denoising is selected. And let's also switch it from the default to filmic mode so it looks a lot better. And now I'm just going to render this out. I'll pause the recording and come back when it's done. Alright, so it's done rendering and it looks really good. So with these two marble materials, you can always adjust the factor of the distortion. Let's just open it up real quick. And select this plane here. So you can always affect this mix value here to affect the distortion of this marble texture. And you can play around with these colors here to get any sort of marble material that you want. But for this tutorial, I think this turned out pretty well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this tutorial, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, feel free to leave them in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching.